So welcome everyone. This looks like the last year of 2020, and I'm sure everyone's looking forward to a better, different kind of year. I actually got a Rosh Hashanah card that was sent to me by one of the institutions overseas. It arrived, it was sent for Rosh Hashanah with honey and apples and everything, and arrived yesterday in the post. I took a picture of it and I complained and I said, how could you send me a Rosh Hashanah card for the New Year? I mean, it's like we know that the Rosh Hashanah is the New Year. And so they explained, no, they sent it a long time ago. So now I understand. The South African Post, it arrived 4 months late or whatever, but that just the year ahead be filled with joy and happiness and good health and success in all of our endeavors. I'm going to start with a summary as we always do. And it's, whoops, wrong one completely. It's an interesting packed Shabbos this week. We complete the entire book of Shemot, of the book of Exodus. And we say those famous words we say at the end of each book, which we'll come back to. Chazak, chazak, let us take strength, let us take strength, and let us be strengthened. So that's the message of this Shabbat. That's the grand finale of the book of Exodus. What does this last section talk about? So Yaakov lived the last 17 years of his life in Egypt. He calls in Joseph and he says, I want you to make a promise to me. I want you to bury me in Israel. It's all good and fine that we're here in Egypt, but I want to make sure that I will be interred in the Holy Land. Then what happens is Yaakov confers on Ephraim and Manasseh blessings, but not only blessings, he elevates them to the status of tribal progenitors, which means that they were elevated from being grandchildren to children, and that was very significant because the children were going to have the tribes. And the tribes were formed by the children of Yaakov. And here, the grandchildren, two of them, Joseph's children, were elevated into a position of prominence where they now become two of the 12 tribes. Now, Joseph places Manasseh, the firstborn, to Yaakov's right, because the right, the Yamin, which is our stronger hand, is associated with greatness, with a greater degree of chesed, of kindness. And he put Ephraim, who was the younger son, to Jacob's left. This is the famous story where Yaakov crosses his hands, placing his more prestigious right hand on the head of Ephraim. And then Joseph says, no, 1 second, he's the younger, he's the older. Okay, that'll come up soon. I see it's point number 6. Point number 5, what was the blessing? Amongst other things, Hamalach HaGoy Eloisi, the angel who redeemed me from all harm, may bless all these youths, these young men, and may they be called by my name and the name of my fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and may they multiply abundantly like fish, like fish in the midst of the land. This is the famous song, or the words that we recite on Simchas Torah when we called up the Kol HaNa'arim, all of the young boys to get an aliyah to the Torah. We always cite these words that were the blessing from Jacob to his grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, Joseph sees that his father is crossing his hands over so that his more prestigious right hand is now on the head of the younger child. And he attempts to adjust his father's hands. And Yaakov says, no, Yadaiti b'ni, I know very well, you don't have to tell me, I know who's the older one, but the younger brother will be even greater. So we actually have the younger child receiving a greater degree of bracha, which is a theme in its own right. It keeps happening. Now all of Israel will bless each other by saying, may Hashem make you great like Ephraim and Manasseh. So not only were they given a blessing, and not only were they elevated to the status of children and therefore tribal heads, but in addition to that, the blessing is that may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh will be the blessing that all people throughout time, including you and me on Friday nights, if we are to bless our children, we say Yisimchem Elokim ke Ephraim Mechim Manasseh, as I say in Shul on Friday night when we are in Shul, may you be like Ephraim and Manasseh. So the blessing was that you will be the means by which blessings will be in future given over to children. Then Yaakov, this takes up quite a, number 8 is just 1 point here, but it takes up quite a long section of the Parsha. He gives each son a poetic and cryptic parting personal message. Some of them are very flattering. Some of them are not so flattering. But the commentaries expend a lot of words. Rashi, the commentary, spends a lot of explanation on these cryptic messages about his sons. We'll come back to some of them. Then Yaakov repeats his request to be buried in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, not only in the Holy Land, but specifically in the same cave where Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, and Leah are buried. And he passes away at the age of 147. Now there's national mourning that takes place in Egypt. Following that, Pharaoh says to Joseph, I give you permission, because he was the second in command. He had to ask permission to take leave, to carry your father Jacob's body up to Israel. Not only did he allow them to go, but the elders of Egypt also went with the family and were present when he was buried in Marat HaMachpelah in Hebron, near Yerushalayim. Now, the brothers of Joseph fear that they are going into a new season. We'll come back to this point, because now that their father has passed away, maybe this will be Joseph's opportunity to finally exact revenge and vengeance for what they did to him. As long as the father was alive, he behaved, but now he might not be restrained and he might not be disciplined and he might cause them harm. So they mention that Jacob had wanted to ensure that they would remain true to one another, that they shouldn't harm each other, and Joseph reassures them that he harbors no ill feeling towards them. They could be rest assured. Joseph himself lives to 110 years, so we actually have the passing of Jacob and Joseph in this week's Parsha, two of the great fathers of our people. And before passing away, Joseph assures his children and the Jewish people that Hashem would eventually take them out of Egypt. They will eventually get to the promised land. And then Joseph asks his brothers to promise that they would inter him in Israel. So exactly as his father had requested of him, of Joseph, that Jacob's body would be brought to Israel, Joseph asked his brothers to do the same. So this is the summary of this week's Parsha. And now we're going to some of the details that relate to some of its messages and life's messages. Now, the obvious question that has to be asked this week is that the name of this portion is called Vayechi. Vayechi means to live. And there is a strange practice in the Torah that in a Parsha that is called Vayechi, and he lived, it deals not with the death of Jacob, not only Jacob, of Joseph itself as well. So we know that a name is not arbitrarily chosen. It's not just like the first word of the portion and we call it by that, like when you're trying to save a document on Word, it catches the first word and that's the name of the document default unless you change it. That's not how names of Parshas are given in the Torah. They are the quintessential summary point of that week's reading. So why would a reading that deals with the death of Jacob and the death of Joseph be called Vayechi? And it's so interesting that it's not just like an arbitrary situation. It actually happened before. The portion of that deals with the passing of Sarah is called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. And it deals with her passing. So we've got to understand, what does it mean to call it the life of Jacob when it actually deals with his passing? So there are a few interesting classical commentaries that discuss this point. It is the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, one of the great commentaries, that says that in fact these were the greatest years of his life. These last years of Jacob that he spent in Egypt, Vayechi Yaakov, and he lived in the land of Egypt, they were the best part of his life, the finest years of his life. The Baal HaTurim, who is a commentary that often speaks so beautifully about the details of language, he says that the word Vayechi is that he lived 17 years, and 17 is the gematria, is the numerical value of Toiv. Toiv, Tet, Vav, Bet, which spells good, is the numerical value of 17. These 17 years are the best years of his life, years of prosperity, goodness, peace. His other 130 years were filled with toil and pain and separation from family and separation from his son, lots of tzaras. So both the Midrash and the Baal HaTurim needs to be understood as we began asking, why would we call these the best years of Jacob's life? Now, Jacob did have a hard life, but Egypt represented the antithesis of everything that he lived for. The culture, the value systems, the idolatry, everything about Egypt was exact opposite from what he stood for as a human being. How could we say that these were the finest years of his life? And this is predicated on understanding, as I often mention, in God forbid times of loss of life, that we need to define life if we need to know how to respond to the loss of it. You cannot understand what loss of life means unless you first understand the definition of life. And if God forbid life is defined by all of the situations around us, the superficial assets of wealth, the glory and the honor that people get by other people lauding them in public, all of the superficial things in life, if God forbid that is what life is defined as, then in death, it robs us of everything that we thought was important, because in one foul swoop, we immediately have everything that was important being lost. Because in that moment of passing, it's irrelevant, the rand, or the extra dollar, or the extra amount of time that the person could have spent at work. Nobody spends their last moments in this world regretting that they didn't spend another few minutes making another buck. What is a person thinking at that last final moment? They're thinking about the issues that are real. Values, family, continuity. How is my family going to survive without me? It's the all important issues of life. That's what a person is busy with at the last minute of life. And if that is how a person has lived their entire life, death robs us of much less, because it does not rob us of memories and of relationships and of values and of the important things that are passed on to children. And with that in mind, we have to understand these last 17 years of Yaakov. Jacob lived in his father's house. There must have been good years. Moments in which he was studying Torah. Moments in which he was building a family. Yes, there were difficult times, but how could these be the best times? And what we're going to see from this entire portion is we're going to see that there is Jewish continuity. That his children are true to the causes that he felt so valuable in life. We're going to see that Jacob sees that in spite of the situation and the environment, his children have chosen to be a continuation of his life message. And uniquely, Jacob only. Jacob had something that Abraham didn't have and that Isaac didn't have, because each of them had a child who went away from the path of his chosen belief in one God. We had Ishmael and we had Esav. But Jacob is the first of our forefathers, the third, but the first of our forefathers whose entire children, all of his children, his entire progeny are true to the cause. And this is emphasized in these last 17 years. In these last 17 years of his life, he comes to realize that he's created a family, not only a family, a dynasty, not only a dynasty, but tribal leaders who are going to be able to lead the people through any circumstance in life. So how could these be the best years of his life? It can only be if we explain what he determined and defined life to be. And if life was the continuation of the value system that he and his parents, his father and his grandfather, his grandparents, that continues with children, that came into focus in these last 17 years. All of his children together, everyone around him, in spite of the fact that they were in Egypt. His joy and his happiness the last 17 years wasn't because he had a good river view of the Nile from his hotel room. That was not why he was finding these the best years of his life. They were the best years of his life because he saw that he had the wherewithal, and his children had the wherewithal to continue and to deal with any circumstance in life. That was the most comforting strength that Jacob could have. And for that reason, the commentaries speak about the point that we made last week, that before he went down to Egypt, Yehuda shalach lefanav Goshna, he sent Judah, his son, ahead of the pack to Goshen, and Lahiros, to teach. And the word Lahiros means to teach Torah. And the Medrash explains that Judah was sent ahead of all of the children when Jacob went down to Egypt to set up an academy of learning. When one studies Torah, one is brought close to Hashem, so that even in Egypt, one can live a true life. So it doesn't happen automatically. You want to know if this happens automatically? It doesn't happen automatically that a family chooses the value systems of a grandfather and great-grandfather and a father, even if the circumstances don't allow for it. It takes investment. And Jacob made that investment. He said, before I go down to Egypt, I've got to prepare the terrain so that we survive this Egypt. And the most important element was education. I'm going to set up the educational system that my children and grandchildren are going to be anchored in the value system of the Jewish people and of the Torah. That's why education is so vital and so important. Because, and people often complain, and there might be reason to complain that there's exorbitant prices that has to be paid for private education, and it is exorbitant, but that is the cost. But in terms of life priorities, long before the additional vacation and the fancy cars we drive and the houses that we live in and the expenses that many of us incur, long before that, we should be educating our children and helping others to educate theirs. That is how vital it is to our survival. All the comforts of life are short-lived, and this is an investment for eternity. So how did Yaakov find that these were going to be the best years? Because he saw Jewish continuity. But it didn't just happen. He invested. He made sure that there would be the wherewithal, the education, that there would be the Jewish continuity that he so desired. Moving on. Okay, not only does Jacob ask of his son Joseph to ensure that he will not be buried in Egypt, but he makes him take an oath. Now, when you take an oath, it means that it's something that is so important, not just a little bit important, not just in the extra notes of one's life. This is, when it comes down to it, this is an oath. So he insists that his son takes a solemn oath. Because Galut can never be our true home. As much as we implied before that the 17 years were the best years of his life, immediately we dispel the notion, the possibility of thinking that it had anything to do with the fact that he was in a foreign land of Egypt. Look where he immediately said, get me out of here, get me out of here. Make sure that Galut is not our true home, that we're always yearning for Israel, that we're always hoping that we're going to be relocated back to where we really belong. That has to be a constant thought in our minds, and that's the oath. You know, we can ask lots of things of our children. Make sure to take out the garbage, make sure, we've got lots of requests that we ask of our children. But when do we make them take an oath? That is the most important element. So clearly we're dispelling the notion that his last 17 happy years in Egypt had nothing to do with the fact that Egypt was a comfort zone. His first request, once he would pass on, would be taken back to Israel. This was a temporary abode and a necessary journey that the family had to go on, but that was never called home. And you see the difference between these two words, which I've highlighted, when he says, Una Sasani, and you will raise me up, you'll elevate me out of Egypt back to the promised land, so I can be buried there. Last week, we had another verb, or reflective word, which is Vayechi, that they came down to Egypt, and then Vayechi, they were enveloped by Egypt. There was a possibility of Egypt owning them rather than owning Egypt. We can get very stuck in the places that we frequent and that the journeys that Jews have done through the world. So the word Unasasani is lift me out of here, Vayechi could imply being captured and caught by the places that we are. So many Jews have been caught in the places that they have landed up in across the world and sometimes never extricated themselves from there. So the bottom line approach that the Rebbe says is we approach God every single day of our life, many times a day, and we plead to Hashem, take us out of Egypt. Mimitzrayim galtanu, you redeemed us in the past out of Egypt, but Goy El Yisrael, but you are the Redeemer of Israel, and you will take us out again. We say it in Shemona Esrei a number of times. We should never ever feel comfortable and totally at home in foreign pastures. We need to know where home is. Now, a passing comment about kindness, because Yaakov, when he asks Joseph to promise that he's going to take his body out of Egypt to the promised land, he says, do kindness and truth, and the truth. So Rashi explains that a kindness done to the dead is a true kindness. You have kindness, and then you have a kindness and a truth, true kindness. And what's the difference? Well, kindness can be done, and often we have in mind when we're doing the act of kindness that we're going to have it reciprocated. It's an investment. I'm doing something good for you, and then later on you'll do something good for me. So our kindness might not so much be thinking about the needs of the other person, but we might be thinking about ourselves. It could be. But when it comes to doing a kindness for the dead, which is what the Chevra Kadisha, the holy organization of our community, for which we should be so grateful, that the work that they do in helping those who have passed on from this world, when you do a favor for the dead, it's a favor that you cannot get a return, because that person's passed on. So any time that we do a chesed for the dead, specifically, obviously putting aside for the family of the dead, but for the dead, so one does not expect a favor in return, and that becomes a model. That sets us and reminds us, it shows man, that we are capable of a truly altruistic deed, deriving from an intrinsic desire to give of ourselves for our fellows. So this point, this wording that he uses, which we're saying applies specifically to doing kindness to the dead, is in fact opening up the door and saying to us, yes, you can. We don't only have a capacity to do kindness with an ulterior motive. We have a capacity to do kindness with just because I want to make your life better. And that's something to aspire to. And that is chesed shel emes, not just kindness, but true kindness, the ultimate kindness. Kindness that we actually have only one thing in mind and nothing about ourselves. This is a beautiful thought that my father used to share with me every time we came past this pasuk. And when Joseph responds to his father Jacob's request, so his father said, please take my body out of Egypt and bring it to the promised land, as we've been discussing. And he says, I will do exactly as you say. Now, the simple meaning of that is I will fulfill your request. You asked me to take your body out of the land of Egypt. I will do what you say. I will do as you say. You asked me to take you out. My father used to say that there's a much deeper understanding of what I'll do as you say. Not only will I fulfill your request as you've made it, but I will do as you say. I will make the same request that you made of me. I will make that request of my brothers before I die. Okay, it's much a deeper level. It's not just saying that I will fulfill what you find is important. He's saying to his father, it's so important is it to me to understand what your request is. Your request is going to be my request. Obviously, I'll fulfill your request. I will do what you're asking me to do. But he said much more to that than that to him. He said, I reassure you, my father, that what you're requesting becomes my request too. Back to the points of education. So educating, it could be to teach somebody what is important, and hopefully they'll respond to what you said is important. But educating in a way that you are communicating the value, that you are telling the child, I want you to have the same value system as I did and my father did and my grandfather did. That's the reassurance. Not only that our parents will say, okay, Dad, don't worry, Pops, we'll do what you asked me to do because you're important to me and I will fulfill your request. A much deeper fulfillment of education is when a child says to a parent, my father, not only will I do what you've asked me to do, but I want what you want. And I want for my children what you wanted of your child. And that's the communication of educating principles from one generation to the next. Anochi asechi berecha means I will ask of my children exactly as you've asked of me. That would be the greatest joy. Okay, I'm going to skip this one. If there's time, I'll come back to it. Now, there's an interesting side discussion that's happening beyond the absolute understanding of the words in the verse. And it says, Vani, when I came from Padan, Yaakov is telling his son Joseph, Rachel, your mother, died by me in the land of Canaan, on the way, when yet there was just a little way to come to Ephrat. And I buried her there by the way of Ephrat, that is Bethlehem. Okay, we all know today that there's a city called Bethlehem. We struggle to get in there, and there's walls to protect us, not like the old days when I was a kid. You would just cross the street and go to Kever Rachel. It's now very heavily protected. And just around that area, there's a city that was started called Efrat. And there's a huge amount of Anglo-Saxons who live there, a very, very active and involved and vibrant city. So we know that the city of Efrat was right near Bethlehem. So now, in the midst of telling his son, I want you to bury me not in Egypt, but to take my body up to bury it in the land of Israel, he then sidetracks and he says, and I want you to know there's a story. And the story was that your mother, my wife Rachel, died on the wayside, and I buried her in Bethlehem, near Efrat, in Bethlehem. That's what we know. She's not buried in Marat HaMachpelah. All of the forefathers of that those 3 generations were buried except for Rachel. But why is he telling that to Joseph right now? He's asking him to take my bones out and bring me back to the land of Canaan. And now he's suddenly starting to talk about his mother. But what's the obvious thought that's going on? If I think it's so important to be buried in Marat HaMachpelah, you might have it in your head and your mind. Why didn't I do that for your mother? Wouldn't that be the obvious question? You're telling me how important it is to be buried in Marat HaMachpelah, but at the back of his mind, he could be thinking, now why, if it was so important, didn't you take the trouble to bury my mother in Marat HaMachpelah? Where did you bury her? On the roadside, in the city of Bethlehem, on the road. So watch this beautiful Rashi as he quotes from the Medrash. Jacob said to Joseph, I'm asking you to trouble yourself to take me to be buried in the land, even though I did not do the same for your mother. She died a short distance from Bethlehem, and I did not even take her to Bethlehem, but buried her on the wayside. It's still on the main road today. So he explained, I buried her there, so she would be a help for her children. When Nebuzaradan would exile them and they would pass by that route, they would go to Babylon by that route out of Jerusalem towards Babylon. They would pass Bethlehem. Then Rachel will come out of her grave and weep and plead for mercy for them. As it is written in Jeremiah, Kol barama nishma, a voice is heard on high, and Rachel mevakal baneha, Rachel is weeping for her children. And God eventually answers her, Yesh sachar, there is reward for your toil. V'shavu bonim ligvulam, and your children will return to their borders. So there is a very emotional and powerful midrash about Rachel being buried, specifically in Bethlehem. And that not only was it a deficiency, but Rachel's whole life was about ensuring the safety of her children. She would not want to be buried any other place than in the place where she would be able to eventually pray for her children. And the Midrash waxes poetic here and elsewhere, that when they did go down to Babylon, Abraham cried for his children, Isaac, Jacob, everyone cried, and Hashem did not find a success in their prayers. It was when Rachel prayed, Rachel mevaka. That's when God said, Mini kolech bibechi, stop crying, Rachel. I cannot take it. You have to stop. Because in fact, she was impacting on God's decision. But at any rate, how did the Jewish people survive their galut in subsequent exile? Not in Egypt, but in Babylon, was because a mother was by the wayside. And a mother lived on. After she had completed her life, she lived on in giving strength and hope to her children. That theme is constantly coming through, that life is afterlife and beyond life and living on and true life, not as we often define it. So there's an interesting emotional exchange where Yaakov is reassuring Yosef that he didn't bury her there for any other reason than what would have been her greatest desire, which it was, that she would protect her children in generations to come. Now it's interesting that we said that Ephraim and Manasseh got a blessing, that not only did they get the blessing, but whoever will in future bless their children, they will say, Yesimchem Elokim ke Ephraim v'chi Manasseh, may you be as great as Ephraim and Manasseh. He who wishes to bless his sons will bless them with the same blessing. So the question is, why? I mean, I'm sure we've all had the question on a Friday night, we bless our children. Why don't we bless our children to be like Abraham? Why do we say, may you be as great as Ephraim and Manasseh? So there are many insights. One of the commentaries explains similar to what we've been speaking about, the theme tonight. And that is that many of the children were good. And they're good because they were raised in the house of Jacob. They were raised in Yerushalayim, in a religious neighborhood. Everything seemed to be speaking to success. What was unique about the success of Ephraim and Manasseh is that the circumstances of their life, they were born in foreign territory. They were born in Egypt. They weren't born in Israel. They were born in circumstances that were far from idyllic. When we bless our children, we bless our children to succeed and to grow, not only because circumstances around them are optimum and everything speaks for success. What is the greatest blessing we can give to our children? That notwithstanding circumstances around you, you stand by your values because you are like Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh raised in the worst distant circumstance, detached, far away, not having had, not knowing about their father, their grandfather Jacob for all of those years until now. Yet they were true to the cause. That's the blessing. We want our children to be children who will be success stories, notwithstanding the circumstances that surround them. Okay, just in passing, I don't want to spend too much time on this. It speaks about Jacob when he's now talking to his children. He says that I purchased Shechem. I took Shechem from the hands of the Amorites. That's where Joseph was eventually buried. I took Shechem from the hands of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow. And the Midrash Mechilta quoted by Rashi says, nowhere in the Torah do we see that Jacob captured Shechem with military power. It doesn't say that there was a war. So the Midrash deviates and says that the word sword in this place is prayer and the word bow is supplication. So the Kotzker Rebbe, the Rebbe, holy Rebbe of Kotsk, says, why is prayer like a bow? Why do we compare prayer to a bow? So what's interesting is that in times gone by when people needed weapons or needed to fight, they would use their fists, and eventually they had swords which could reach a little bit further. But the age of rocket propulsion was born when somebody discovered the bow and arrow. And why is that? Because the bow and arrow was counterintuitive. If you want to go further in the direction in front of you, where do you store the energy? Where do you put your energy? In the exact opposite direction from where you want to go. You want to go forward, and the bow, you pull backwards. Why are you going in the wrong direction? Any Meshugana knows if you want to go forward, you go forward. But this is the first time that rocket propulsion was being invented. And that is that if you can create an energy stored as an action, you can create a reaction. It could create a propulsion forward at a much greater rate than you could ever do before. And why does that relate to prayer? Because we want to reach the highest heights. We want to talk to God. What's the first act that we do to reach God? We reach inwards. We reach into our own hearts. It's not the first thing that to do is to say, God, this is what you should do. We're getting there. But the first thing we need to do is, where should I be? And the closer and the nearer we draw to our own hearts, the more energy we store to be able to reach the highest spiritual journey. But it begins by going into ourselves, first towards our own hearts, and then we can reach way beyond. Okay, now Yaakov calls all of his sons, and he says, Hikaptzu, gather around me, and I'll tell you what's going to happen by Charis HaYamim at the end of days. And in spite of calling them together and saying, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen at the end of days, he doesn't. He doesn't actually tell them what's happening at the end of days. The subject changes, and he gives them various blessings. So the Talmud in Psachim says that Jacob wished to reveal to his sons the end of days, exactly when Mashiach would come, but the divine presence departed from him. And what he wanted to do didn't actually happen. And then Jacob said, perhaps there's one amongst my children who's not fit. Remember we said Abraham had a son Ishmael who was not fit to continue the journey. Or my father Isaac had a son Esau was not fit. Maybe he called them to a moment of truth. I'm about to leave this world. Is there anyone one of you, who does not stand for what I believe in one God of Israel? And in unison, says the Midrash, all the sons around his bed said the word Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Just as there's only one in your heart, so is there only one God in our heart. At that moment, Yaakov exclaimed, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed. Now God's name is blessed eternally. Shema Yisrael says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's what I'm saying today. But with this message I get back from our children, now I can say is not only is God blessed, but God's blessed in his glorious kingdom forever and ever. As we keep saying, life is going to continue. This is the life, Vayechi, because there's life beyond life. And here he once again sees that the progeny are dedicated to the cause of Shema Yisrael. He says the words, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed. And then just in passant, I'm going to add continue that the rabbi said, how shall we act? When we say the word Shema, should we say it like Moshe Rabbeinu, who just said the word Shema and didn't say the word Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed? Or should we do it like our teacher Jacob and his children, who said the words Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed? Should we, when we say Shema in the morning, should we say it like Moses said it, or like Jacob and his children said it? And hence they enacted that it should be recited quietly. There's actually other references why we say Shema and Vahaya and Baruch Shem, but this is one of them. And the reason that we always say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto L'Olam Va'ed in a whisper is because we're not sure whether to say it or not say it. Moses did not say those words. It was Jacob and his children. On Yom Kippur, when we are like a malach and like an angel, so we can be presumptuous to act even beyond what we refrain from doing the rest of the year. That's why on Yom Kippur we specifically say the words Baruch Shem aloud. Now, just going into final words that I can share as we're finishing. I mentioned my father already. I see I always like try and bring in something that he taught me. So we have now Jacob talking to the sons. He wanted to tell them when Mashiach's coming. God didn't allow that to happen. He's now addressing each of the children, and two of the children is Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi Achim, and he cursed their anger. Remember, they had tricked the city of Shechem to circumcise themselves because Shechem had raped Dinah, their sister. Hachazonah, are you going to cause our sister to be like a harlot? And they went out and they killed the entire city of Shechem, and their father was angry at them. And he now said to them, cursed be your anger. So the first thing I want to say from my father is, my father always used to say the Hebrew word anger is af, or arur apam. Cursed be their anger. The root word is af, which is anger, which also is the Hebrew word for nose. So what's the connection between a nose and anger? My father used to say, you can kill a person with anger. Here they said, cursed be your anger because you went out, kiba apam hargu ish, because with their anger they killed a person, they killed the city of Shechem. But then my father used to add, and you can kill a person with a twist of your nose. Now, how can you exactly kill a human being by twisting your nose? It's got to be a very, very weak human being, and you're going to end up with a broken nose. But the point was that you can cause so much harm just by the way you twist your nose. When a person comes along and says, this and this happened, isn't that great, isn't that it happened? You give a vaf with the nose to show your disapproval, or you don't agree, or you do agree, or somebody's asking you about a reference about a person, and you machakrim with the nose, you turn your nose, you could kill somebody. You could have adverse effects that are to the extreme just by our facial expressions. That was the point my father was saying. Kiba apam hargu ish, they killed people with their anger, but the word af also means their nose. You've got to be careful with the way we use our facial features, and obviously our words. This is even. Words can kill, but even not saying the words, you can say, I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. I just looked like that. Yeah, That reaction is enough to kill a person in a particular situation. So be careful how we use our nose. But moving on that same slide, look how, and this is a beautiful message in chinuch, in education. Jacob was really upset with his two sons, Shimon and Levi, because they'd killed the whole city of Shechem in retribution for their sister being raped. But what does he curse? He curses their anger. The Midrash, this is going back thousands of years. These are modern themes in psychology and educating children. Even when he rebuked them, what did he rebuke? He cursed their anger. He didn't curse them. Thus, Bilam in Numbers, the book of Numbers says, how can I curse a nation that God has not cursed? Because there's two ways. You can play the person and you can play the activity. And when we educate our children, in classical old report cards, I think I have report cards from when I was in grade 1, which is probably interesting reading. And in those days, teachers could be ruthless. The report comments often said, your son is lazy. Your son is not intelligent. I mean, those are the comments of the teacher would try that today. The teacher would be fired summarily for good reason. Because you never label the child. You never go for the child. You go for the activity. And you talk about the activity that the child does. So here, Jacob is really upset with the way Shimon and Levi had behaved. But he didn't say, I curse you. He said, I curse the anger of you. Know that that was an inappropriate emotion. That was the wrong activity, the wrong action. So we should always make sure that when we're educating our children, we never label our children. We never call them by a name, and we never thrust our anger at the entirety of the person. It's the action that we disassociate ourselves from. The action that we say is reprehensible, but not, God forbid, the child. The child is holy. The child has an neshama. The child, if nurtured, is only going to be good. So focus on the good of the child and the negative elements of the action that they did. The Midrash is saying something that we seem to think we've discovered in education in the 20th century, 21st century. A very beautiful partnership that happens is two other brothers, Yisachar and Zebulun. And the blessing that Jacob gives to Zebulun is you will dwell on the shore of the sea and you'll have ships. And Yisachar will be a strong-boned donkey, which is a total metaphor. And that doesn't mean that you go call your child a donkey, just in view of what I just said a few seconds ago. Bowing his shoulder to the load, so it beckons for interpretation. The tribes of Zebulun and Yisachar formed a partnership. Zebulun engaged in commerce, and Yisachar occupied himself in Torah study. Not just these two brothers, Yisachar and Zebulun. This is a promise for their tribes that would emerge for future generations. So Zebulun and Yisachar were two tribes that lived alongside one another, and Zebulun was involved in commerce, was the business people, the ships on the ocean, they went into trade, and Yisachar was completely studying Torah. And Jacob placed Zebulun before Yisachar, although Yisachar was the elder of the two. Same theme comes out again, the younger child. Why does he name the younger child first? Since if it were not for Zebulun, who is the business person, Yisachar would not be able to occupy himself in Torah. So a very special message in the partnerships that happen in our people, Israel and Am Yisrael. We have people that are involved in studying Torah, in yeshiva, and the various day schools, and all the things that are involved in education. And then you have the people involved in business. And there's a partnership. A shul cannot survive if it doesn't have its community investing in that shul and being successful in their business endeavors to be able to do so. So it's not, I'm the holy, pious Jew studying Torah, and you just a businessman who's going to the bank. There's a partnership. And the partnership formed enables each other. The person learning Torah will not be able to succeed without the financial assistance from Zebulun, and Zebulun will not succeed in his financial endeavors without his anchor to the value system of the Torah. So it's a very important partnership, And every person, every single one of us has a role to play, and we should never ever downplay the significance of our contribution and think that this is only the physical, financial aspect of the Torah, and this is the real thing. It's a partnership, and we need both. And both should feel the importance and the significance. I think I'm going to add with one more slide because this time is late. Let's see if we can add one more in. Okay, interesting that it says specifically by Joseph, that Joseph made a mourning for his father for 7 days. This is the source in the Jerusalem Talmud for knowing that there's Shiva, that there's 7 days of mourning. It is taken from the story of Jacob and the mourning that Joseph did. Okay, there's not much time, so I'm going to end off with the final slide, and that is that the last verse of the book of Exodus ends off. And Joseph died at the age of 110, and the Egyptians embalmed him, and they placed him in a coffin in Mitzrayim. That's how the whole book of Exodus ends. They placed him in a coffin in Mitzrayim. What is even more incredible is that in response to those last words of the book of Shemot, what do we cry out? We shout out, as we would have done had we been in Shul the Shabbos. Say it at home. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, and let us be strengthened. We proclaim those words at the end of every single book that we complete in the Torah. But over here, what is very strange is what is the last words of the book of Shemot. Joseph died, this and this age, they embalmed him. They put him in a coffin in Mitzrayim. The end. Chazak, chazak, let's take strength. Beautiful. We end on such a high. You know, we learned the Gemara, our own great part Gemara, she learned that we never end off on a negative. When we end off a reading, we always end off on a positive. We work things out. The division of the verses, we never want to end on a negative. We don't want to start on a negative, we don't want to end on a negative. So here we end off that Joseph dies, and he's put in a coffin. And on that, we seem to proclaim the words, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. So let's get back to the very theme that we spoke about this whole evening. The name of this Parsha is called Vayechi. This is the end of the portion of Exodus. And Vayechi means to live, and it deals with the death of Jacob and with Joseph, but it also deals with the fact that they will live on, and that children have been raised to continue the value system. And when Jacob died, and Taki was buried in Egypt, and Joseph was buried temporarily in Egypt until they left Egypt. They took him with him. So his presence gave strength to the Jewish people. So in actual fact, we don't say they died. As the Midrash says, whoever says Jacob died, is making a mistake. The Gemara asks, what do you mean I'm making a mistake? They embalmed him. They buried him. They put him in a coffin. So yes, says the Gemara. They did all of that. But in the subsequent books, it talks about his children. And his children were a continuation. If his children live on in the value system, he lives on in the value system. Jacob never died. He died, but he never died. And Moshe is still called Moshe Rabbeinu. And Abraham is still called Abraham Avinu, our father, our teacher. Because people of that caliber lived on by what they taught to the generations to come. The book of Shemot ends, but it continues with the journey of their children. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. We take strength that it doesn't end, this continuity. Thank you so much for joining.
Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Judy. Darren, thank you for joining. I don't know, all the way from overseas. Barry, nice to see you. Mitch, thank you for joining. Helene, Sam, Joy, thank you, the Sassoons.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbos.
And you too. Good Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Jonathan, for joining, and Beulah, and the Burgers. And I can't even recognize one of our guests. I don't know. Who is VS86 Tech Z2S iPhone? I don't know. I can't see who you are. You got to unmute yourself and tell me. Thank you, Joy, for joining. Thank you. Have a good week, everybody. And a good Shabbos.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I see.
This is Mitch's mommy. This is Helen. I want to know, you were talking about a crinkling nose, but under the mask, can you see someone's features? This is the question.
Today, that's the question. We don't know who each other are. Yeah. We don't know anymore. Please, God, Hashem should remove the mask. Yeah.
We should crinkle and frown as much as we like then. Thank you for the wonderful shiur, and my mom was also watching.
Okay. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.